How a case goes through the major stages of the criminal justice system. Introduction. The criminal justice system is a complex process that includes three main parts. These are the police, the courts, and the corrections, which in turn have many subchapters and different aspects. Each of these parts has its characteristics depending on the crime, offender, state, legal framework, etc. However, in most cases, it is a definite structure that has clear boundaries. Police, courts, and corrections. The initial stage, namely the police, includes the identification of the offender and one's act. Namely, there is a finding of evidence or a refutation of the fact that the crime was committed by the suspect, who was identified before. Moreover, there is a questioning of witnesses or the victim, in which the latter can identify the offender, significantly increasing the progress of the investigation. After that, one needs to find evidence that the suspect has committed a crime. It can include clothing, DNA, hair, shoe marks, etc. After that, court proceedings take place, where charges and evidence are presented to the defense. If the defense does not have clear points in favor of the suspect's innocence, the court acquaints the latter with his rights and punishment. At the final stage, the punishment is executed, and the victim is transported to the location, depending on the term and type. Stage 1. Entry into the system. In the first stage, the case of Maureen's rape moves in the aspect of receiving a statement and getting acquainted with the information. Thus, the mother addressed the police station on the outskirts of the city and announced that her daughter had been raped, after which the investigation process was launched. Next, the police collect all the necessary information, get to know the victim, and interview witnesses. In this case, the process was simplified by the fact that Maureen identified the perpetrator, and as a result, the police got the suspect right away. Thus, the task of the police is now to collect evidence that it was Michael, the suspect, who committed this crime. However, the man did not confirm his guilt at the initial meeting, and he was released until the necessary evidence was collected. After examining the alleged crime scene, police found pieces of clothing and blood. Moreover, bruises were found on the victim's body, indicating a struggle. Stage 2. Prosecution and pretrial services. Further, the case enters the phase of the trials, namely the demonstration of the accusation to Michael in the courtroom, as well as familiarization with the rights to silence and a lawyer. In this case, Michael enters the courtroom as an identified culprit after being identified by Maureen while in the hospital. Moreover, evidence was found at the crime scene, based on which Michael appears guilty. Further, the defense asks for the possibility of posting bail, but the court does not have jurisdiction over this decision, so Michael cannot be released. After that, the accused is brought before a grand jury, which does not perform the function of proving the guilt or innocence of the accused. A grand jury may have access to the issuance of an indictment if the evidence presented proves guilt. However, in this case, the grand jury did not find the evidence presented sufficient to pass a verdict, based on which the hearings continued. Stage 3. Adjudication. Next, the case entered the adjudication phase as Michael was released due to insufficient evidence. The prosecuting team has gathered compelling new evidence, including those found at the crime scene and eyewitness and victim accounts. The defendant is again brought to trial and reappears for another trial. At this stage, the judges must make the final decision. To do this, the panel analyzes the new evidence presented for its veracity and wait for indictment or acquittal. Maureen's DNA was presented as evidence from the hospital where she was seen. In addition, one provided photographs from the scene of the incident, which depicted the facts necessary for the investigation. As a result, the position of the prosecutors became more substantial, and it was decided that Michael was guilty. Thus, the decision-making phase that precedes the next phase has ended. Stage 4. Sentencing and sanctions. Once the suspect has been identified, proven guilty, and sentenced, the sentence decision phase begins. The preventive measure is decided depending on the crime that was committed, the evidence, and other circumstances that could affect the decision. It may include fines, imprisonment, probation, community service, or participation in rehabilitation programs. In some cases, At this stage, the defendant may turn out to be innocent, and the judges acquitted him of the charges. In this case, the crime committed was proven to be committed by Michael. For crimes that fall under the group of criminal offenses, the minimum term that can be imposed is 1 year in prison. In this case, Michael's act was identified as a criminal offense. In addition, given the severity of this act, a decision was made about 16 years in prison. It was the final part of this stage, after which comes the last and one of the most critical stages in the criminal justice system. Stage 5. Corrections. Finally comes the last stage of the criminal system in the United States. Corrections include supervision of persons arrested, convicted, or sentenced for criminal offenses. There are several functions of this stage, such as reformation, incapacitation, retribution, and deterrence. The fundamental reason for correction is the criminal's awareness of what he has done and the fact that it is against morality and the law. It is expected that the individual will transform his thinking towards morality and give up criminal plans and ideas. It is worth noting that in some cases, this stage formulates the conscious isolation of the criminal from people for the sake of security. It means that the person is dangerous to society and should not be among people so as not to expose the latter to danger to life and health. In this case, Michael was sentenced to 16 years in prison, which means he will be supervised in a special correctional facility. Conclusion. To conclude, one may notice how the Maureen rape case went through 5 major stages of the justice system. At the initial stage, the application is received and familiarization with the case materials occurs. The police get acquainted with the stories of eyewitnesses and testimonies of the victim and also decide whether the case is true. After that, the identification of the suspects takes place, which in this case happened quickly since the victim identified the perpetrator. Thus, for the stage of court hearings to start, it was necessary to collect evidence of the guilt of the suspect. It happens by going to the scene of the crime and its thorough examination and analysis. As a result, the necessary evidence was presented, such as DNA and photographs from the place of the incident. It helped to make the prosecutor's position strong, and it was determined that Michael was guilty. Finally, a decision was made on the measure of pruning and put into effect, after which the phase of corrections began.